Time has a way of reshaping wounds into wisdom, and as the years unfolded, John found himself entering a stage of life that felt almost like a second youth, not in the sense of reckless energy, but in the sense of freedom. For the first time in decades, he was no longer defined by the roles of a struggling husband or a single father. His daughter was grown, living her own life, and John was left with something he hadn't had in a long time: space. Space to reflect, to create, and to choose what came next. At first, the quiet of the house seemed unbearable. The ticking clock, the empty dinner table, the silence of the rooms, these were the same reminders that had haunted him after the betrayal years before. But now, they carried a different weight. They no longer mocked him with absence, they invited him into reflection. Instead of asking, "What have I lost?" he now asked, "What can I build?" And so John began to build again, this time not for survival, but for legacy. He poured his energy into writing. The journal entries that once served as therapy slowly transformed into essays, then into chapters of a book. He wrote about love, betrayal, forgiveness, fatherhood, and the resilience of the human heart. Each page was raw, filled with honesty, and free of bitterness. It was not a book about revenge or self-pity, it was about the journey of becoming whole again. When it was finally published, the response overwhelmed him. Letters poured in from strangers across the country, people who saw their own reflection in his words. Some said his story gave them hope during divorce, others said it helped them forgive, and still others admitted it gave them the strength to finally walk away from toxic relationships. John realized something profound: what had once been his deepest wound had become his greatest gift to others. His pain had been recycled into healing. Outside of writing, he found joy in community work. He volunteered at shelters, spoke at schools, and became a mentor for young men who struggled with heartbreak, family conflict, or simply the weight of expectations. To them, John wasn't just an older man telling stories, he was living proof that one could lose everything and still find a meaningful life. One evening after giving a talk, a young man approached him with tears in his eyes. "How did you not give up?" the boy asked. John looked at him for a long moment before replying, "Because someone was watching me, my daughter. And later, I realized the whole world is watching us too. Every choice we make teaches someone else how to live. I didn't want to teach despair. I wanted to teach hope." That conversation stayed with him. It reminded him that his life was no longer only his own, it was a lantern for others still stumbling in the dark. Though he was fulfilled, John's heart was not closed to love. In his later years, he met a woman who, like him, had known loss. Their bond was gentle, built not on illusion but on shared truth. They both understood that love is not about fixing the other's brokenness but about walking together with respect for the scars each carried. With her, John did not feel the rush of naive romance he had once felt in youth. Instead, he felt peace. And perhaps peace, he thought, was the highest form of love. His daughter, now an adult, often teased him about finally moving on, but in her eyes shone admiration. She had watched her father crumble, rebuild, and grow stronger, and now she saw him embrace happiness again without fear. For her, he was the living definition of resilience. As John aged, his reflections deepened. He often sat by the window, watching the seasons change, and thought about the strange design of life. Betrayal had been the most painful chapter of his story, but without it, he would never have become the man he was now. He realized that suffering, as cruel as it feels, sometimes prepares us for purposes greater than ourselves. His book eventually turned into a series of lectures, and those lectures into invitations to conferences around the world. To his surprise, John became a voice people listened to when they needed strength. Not because he was extraordinary, but because he was ordinary, and yet he survived. He had become a symbol of the resilience hidden in everyone. But even with recognition, John remained humble. He still lived in his modest house, tended to his garden, and enjoyed quiet dinners. To him, success was not applause or fame, it was seeing his daughter thrive, seeing strangers heal through his words, and knowing that he had turned suffering into service. One summer evening, surrounded by friends and family, John gave a short speech. He raised his glass and said, "Life doesn't ask for our permission when it breaks us. But we always have a choice in how we rebuild. I chose to rebuild with love, because bitterness builds nothing. And if my story means anything, let it mean this: you can lose almost everything, and still, life will give you enough to start again." Those words lingered in the hearts of everyone present. As the years continued, John's steps grew slower, his hair grayer, but his spirit lighter. He had lived through betrayal, loneliness, and despair. But he had also lived through love, laughter, and redemption. He understood now that the measure of a life is not in how many times we are broken, but in how many times we dare to rise. And when the sun finally began to set on his long journey, John felt no bitterness, no regret. He had carried his pain, transformed it, and left behind a trail of hope for others to follow. Because in the end, John's greatest achievement was not that he had survived betrayal, it was that he had turned it into a story of love, resilience, and renewal.